Have you ever wondered what it would take to be accused of witchcraft in the 1800s? Not casting spells, not flying on a broomstick. Sometimes, all it took was a woman living alone, or knowing how to treat a fever with herbs. Did you know that in parts of 19th century America, people truly believed that a mole on your skin could prove you were a witch? That a curse might simply mean your cow stopped producing milk? So how did superstition run so deep, so dangerously deep, that neighbors turned against neighbors? And fear ruled entire towns? These aren't just legends. These are real stories of trials, ghost tales, and chilling beliefs passed from generation to generation. Stay with me, because every detail you're about to hear might just change how you see the 19th century forever. Back in the 19th century, everyday life was filled with invisible rules, passed down in whispers. Rooted in fear, and rarely questioned, people didn't just believe in luck or fate. They lived by signs, omens, and rituals, convinced that the world around them was full of hidden messages. Take something as simple as a mirror. If one broke, it wasn't just an accident, it meant 7 years of bad luck. That belief was so strong that some families would cover every mirror in the house during a storm or after a death, just in case something crossed over. Seeing a black cat cross your path? A terrible sign. Hearing an owl hoot outside your window at night? It meant someone in the house would die soon. Even things as natural as sneezing had meanings. If you sneezed once, someone was thinking about you. If you sneezed 3 times before breakfast, it was said you'd receive a letter that day. Children were taught to hold their breath when passing a graveyard, to avoid inviting spirits in. Pregnant women were warned not to go outside during an eclipse, or else their child would be born deformed. Even farming followed superstition. Planting on a full moon could mean a better harvest. But if you harvested after sunset, your crops might rot overnight. And these beliefs weren't just harmless old tales. In some communities, if a baby fell ill and no doctor could help, people might whisper, "She's cursed." Neighbors would examine the child's crib for strange symbols or consult an elder who knew protection spells. It's easy to think of these superstitions as silly or quaint, but imagine living in a world with no internet, no modern science, no way to explain why disease spread or crops failed. In a world like that, wouldn't you search for signs too? But what happens when those signs point to a person? When fear and suspicion turn into accusations? That's when the real danger begins. Let's move into the lesser-known side of witch trials in 19th century America, beyond Salem, and into the forgotten corners of fear. When most people hear the words witch trials, their minds jump straight to Salem, 1692. But the truth is, accusations of witchcraft didn't vanish with the last hanging. They simply went underground and re-emerged in quieter, more personal ways throughout the 1800s. In fact, one of the most chilling witchcraft cases didn't happen in Massachusetts at all. It happened in Tennessee, in 1833. A woman named Peggy Owens was known in her town for helping people with herbal remedies and midwifery. But after a series of unexplained deaths and sick animals, whispers began. People claimed they saw her talking to herself in the woods, that she never went to church, and worst of all, that her gaze could make a child cry. That was enough. The town held a secret trial, informal, illegal, but terrifyingly real. Peggy was found guilty and driven out in the middle of the night. No one knows what became of her. In Pennsylvania, a quiet farming town in 1895 witnessed a similar event. A young man named Nelson Remire was killed, murdered in his own home, because his neighbors believed he had placed a hex on them. They didn't take him to court. They broke into his house with candles, a book of local spells, and a plan to destroy what they believed was dark power. The case became known as the York Hex murder, and it revealed just how deep superstition still ran, right into the final years of the 19th century. Even in Ohio, court records from 1852 tell the story of a woman accused of bewitching the livestock of a neighboring farm. The animals had fallen ill, and after a heated confrontation, the woman was publicly shamed and forced to sign a statement denying any devilish involvement. It wasn't a legal trial by modern standards, but in the eyes of the community, it was justice. What all these cases share is something deeply human: fear. In an age before germ theory, before weather forecasting, before mental health understanding, people had few tools to explain the unexplainable. And when things went wrong, someone had to be blamed. And often, it was the quiet woman, the herbal healer, the one who didn't fit. But here's the twist. What if some of these witches were actually healers? Protectors? People with ancient knowledge passed down through generations? Let's step into their world for a moment. In the next part, we'll explore the fascinating and misunderstood line between folk medicine and so-called witchcraft. Long before pharmacies and formal doctors were common in rural 19th century America, people turned to what they had: plants, rituals, and generations of oral wisdom. Folk healing was a way of life, and for many, it was the only form of medicine they knew. But to outsiders, these practices often looked like something darker, something magical. Imagine a woman gently boiling willow bark to ease her child's fever, or a man rubbing crushed garlic on a wound to prevent infection. Today, we know the science. Willow contains salicin, a natural precursor to aspirin. Garlic has antimicrobial properties. But back then, if someone recovered quickly, people whispered that something unnatural was involved. Many communities had a granny woman, or conjure man, an elder who knew which herbs to use for childbirth, stomach ailments, or snake bites. Their methods were often effective, though not always understood. Some would chant softly while applying poultices or bury charms beneath thresholds to ward off illness. Were these gestures spiritual, symbolic, magical? It depended on who you asked. Take the case of Mary Bateman, a healer in rural Kentucky during the 1870s. She brewed teas from wild mint and elderflower, cured headaches with pressure points, and placed coins in water under the bed of the sick. To many, she was a godsend. But after a young boy died suddenly, despite her help, the town turned. They said she had drawn the sickness in, then let it out wrong. She was never charged with a crime, but her reputation never recovered. There was a fine line between healing and heresy. The same tea that cured a fever in one home might be called a witch's brew in another. Even protective rituals, like tying a red string around a baby's wrist or burning sage after a funeral, could be seen as either sacred or suspicious. What's powerful to realize is that many of these remedies were rooted in real knowledge, passed down from enslaved Africans, indigenous tribes, and immigrant grandmothers alike. But because these practices were often led by women, the poor, or the culturally other, they weren't protected, they were targeted. In trying to survive and care for their communities, these folk healers became accidental outcasts. But folk healing was just one part of a much larger web of belief. Because beyond herbs and chants, people believed in something far more haunting: spirits, curses, and invisible forces watching their every move. Let's explore the ghost stories, protective spells, and terrifying legends that kept people up at night. Welcome to the world of haunted beliefs. In the quiet hours of a 19th century night, when the lanterns were out, the house creaked, and the wind whispered through the trees, people believed they weren't alone. The world, to them, was not just physical, it was layered with invisible forces, spirits that lingered, curses that clung, and protection spells passed from one trembling hand to another. Many homes kept a small item near the door or window: a horseshoe, a bundle of dried herbs, or a scrap of red cloth, not for decoration, but protection. These charms were meant to ward off evil spirits, or as they called it, the bad air. And when something terrible happened, a sudden death, a string of misfortune, it wasn't random. It was often blamed on a curse. Stories like the Bell Witch in Tennessee became infamous. In the early 1800s, the Bell family claimed they were haunted by a spirit that scratched at the walls, moved objects, and even spoke. Witnesses said it could predict the future, and locals swore it was real. Even President Andrew Jackson reportedly visited the Bell farm and left terrified. For years, no one dared go near that land after dark. In other places, whispers of the evil eye spread like wildfire. If someone looked at you, or your child, with envy or anger, it was believed they could unknowingly cast harm. To protect against it, people would carry small tokens, blue glass beads, silver coins, or even salt hidden in their pockets. Babies were often given tiny pins or ribbons to keep the spirits away. Then there were the protection spells, quiet little rituals people rarely spoke of, but practiced just the same. Mothers would sweep salt across the door before bedtime. Farmers might say a certain rhyme before planting. Some even buried written prayers or hair clippings beneath the floorboards for luck or safety. Not all spirits were feared. Some were believed to be ancestors, watching and guiding, but the line between guardian and ghost was thin. And when something went wrong, that thin line could snap. What's most fascinating is that many of these beliefs still linger today. Think of how we knock on wood, avoid walking under ladders, or feel uneasy in an old house after dark. They may seem like harmless habits now, but they echo a much older fear that something beyond us is always listening, always watching. And even now, we carry those stories with us. But why? Why do we still hold on to these fears? These tales, these superstitions, hundreds of years after reason and science began to explain the world? Let's close our journey by exploring why the spell of the 19th century still lingers in our modern lives. We live in a world of science, satellites, and smartphones, where information travels at the speed of light, and most mysteries have a logical explanation. And yet, we still jump when the lights flicker. We still hesitate before walking through a dark forest. We still whisper, "Don't jinx it," and knock on wood. Why? Because fear, real, raw, human fear, doesn't vanish with knowledge. It adapts. The beliefs of the 19th century weren't just products of ignorance. They were survival tools. When people didn't understand illness, weather, or death, they made meaning the best way they could. A curse gave shape to chaos. A protection spell gave comfort. A ghost story gave a voice to grief. And those stories? We carry them. We inherit them. That's why, even today, horror movies about witches, haunted houses, and cursed dolls fill our screens. That's why Halloween is one of the most celebrated holidays in the US, complete with black cats, carved pumpkins, and costumes that echo the very superstitions our ancestors feared. That's why you'll still find a horseshoe above a barn door in rural towns, or salt spilled across a countertop, waiting to be thrown over someone's left shoulder. In a way, these old fears connect us to the past, to each other, to something bigger than ourselves. They remind us that no matter how modern we become, we're still storytellers at heart. We still search for meaning in the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, a part of us wants to believe, not in curses or witches exactly, but in the possibility that the world is more mysterious than we'll ever fully understand. So the next time you hear a floorboard creak or catch a chill with no breeze, don't be so quick to brush it off. Somewhere in your bones, in your blood, there's a memory of a time when that sound meant something. When it was a sign, a warning, a presence. Because even now, the past is still with us.